Hey Patreon patrons, this video is about what I learned in doing the Hamlet Zoom project about frames per second. So frames per second is obviously how many frames, still photos, are moving through or cycling through a second that makes it look like a motion picture. And 24 is actually what most American movies work with. It's actually a little bit under that for a really stupid reason. It's 10% under that because of when TV switched over to color. But basically you say it's 24 frames per second. And Zoom even records up to 30 frames per second, which is like the second most used number. 24 is really cinematic, 30 is more smooth because there's even more frames showing you the movement, but most movies do 24. So Zoom records in that many frames per second, and most people expect 24 frames per second. But because I didn't know anything about any of this when I started, and I loaded Zoom into my editing program, which was DaVinci Resolve, it said something about the frames per second and whatever did I want to adapt like the file to the program, and I just hit yes. So it like did this thing where it adapted the files and loaded them all in so it could work with them. My program is really cool. My device is pretty cool, but my device cannot handle 24 frames per second for a 3-hour project and actually show me the smooth motion of those pictures. So as I was struggling to get my processor to process all this data, I started looking into some stuff, and I found somebody who said, you can change DaVinci Resolve's timeline of your project in the frames per second it's working with, and then it will be able to like run more smoothly as you go. But if you change the frames per second from your editing to your rendering, then what you're doing is you're taking out, like if you change from 24 down to something else, you're taking out that many number of pictures every second, and then when you change it back, you're plugging those back in. So all of my edits were like super weird, and the placement of certain things didn't line up exactly with what I visually thought they had, because when I added those frames back in, I was dealing with additional visual material. So I learned that you need to shoot in 24 frames per second if you plan to edit in 24 frames per second, if you plan to present and distribute in 24 frames per second. You want all of those things to line up, because if you monkey around with that at any point in the process, then you just hate it. It's just awful and horrible, horrible things happen. So that's the beginning introductory knowledge Liz has on 24 frames per second. Thanks for your support.